Hello everyone. Today we're doing a concept video which will really be a big overview of metabolism. I will not be going into heaps of detail about every single reaction in this video. This is just to serve as a bit of a guide. Feel free to make your own poster of this diagram, but there will also be super detailed posters available on our Google Drive. Okay, so first we're going to start with carbohydrate metabolism and follow a bit of cellular respiration. To begin with, we're going to start with glucose. Okay, so you should all be familiar with this molecule. As you know, glucose can become pyruvate by the reaction glycolysis. You should also know that pyruvate becomes acetyl coenzyme A, also just written as acetyl-CoA, and this happens in the reaction of the aerobic link reaction. Remembering here as well that pyruvate dehydrogenase is the enzyme that drives this reaction. And that pyruvate dehydrogenase needs the coenzyme vitamin B to power this reaction. Then we know that acetyl-CoA is fed into the citric acid cycle. Here it's important to note one of the intermediate molecules is oxaloacetate, which will come into play a little bit later. Also remembering that NADH and FADH2 are formed here, and these electron carriers then go into the electron transport chain where ATP is synthesized. You should also know that lactate can be made from pyruvate under anaerobic conditions. So lactate. And this is the anaerobic link reaction. Note here that lactate dehydrogenase is the important enzyme in driving this reaction. Now, sorry, that's my cat in the background. Now that is up to the point I covered in the last PSP. There's another important pathway to note, and that is forming glucose from pyruvate in a reaction called gluconeogenesis. Sometimes what happens is that you've ingested a bit too much glucose, which I know happens far too often for me, and this extra glucose can be stored in the liver or the muscle as glycogen. Okay. And this conversion is called glycogenesis. So remember, if you ever see the word genesis, that means to build up something, okay? So this glycogen can later be broken down back into glucose, which is known as glycogen mobilization. And this can happen when you're not ingesting enough glucose, maybe in starvation, for example, and so the body decides to break down the glycogen from its stores in the liver and the muscle. So this is a brief summary of carbohydrate metabolism. Next, we're going to have a look at lipids. Okay, so lipids. Now you should know that lipids are ingested and then they can be stored in fatty tissues. Okay. These lipids can be further broken down into cholesterol, or triacylglycerides, you can never say that, or tags for short. Tags can then be broken down into fatty acids and glycerol. Now, just one note here, this glycerol can be fed back into glycolysis. So if we go here, go all the way back to glycolysis. You don't really need to know any details on that other than the fact that that can happen, okay? Focusing back on fatty acids, they can be converted into acetyl coenzyme A, okay? So if we go into acetyl coenzyme A, And this reaction here is called beta oxidation of fatty acids. Okay. Now, acetyl coenzyme A can also be converted into fatty acids, and this is called lipogenesis. Okay, so remember lipogenesis, building up of lipids. Okay, so there's also acetyl coenzyme A, in addition to be converted into fatty acids, can also be converted into cholesterol. And this concludes lipid metabolism. So we will now have a look at proteins. Okay, so start that up here. So proteins, remember proteins are just a chain of amino acids. Okay, so amino acids, when they're being metabolized, they can be broken down into three separate things. Okay, nucleic acids, an amino group, and a carbon skeleton. Now these nucleic acids are just discarded and they're recycled into the body, okay? This amino group, this actually becomes urea and is excreted from the body. Now the carbon skeleton is what we're most interested in, okay? Because this is where it's actually fed back into metabolism. So two things can happen to it. The carbon skeleton of the amino acids can be transformed into acetyl coenzyme A. Okay, and then from there it'll enter the citric acid cycle. All right. Now, other times it actually becomes oxaloacetate and is fed directly into the citric acid cycle that way. Okay, so that's it for proteins, and now we're going to have a quick look at alcohol metabolism. So, alcohol is also known as ethanol. Okay, so ethanol gets converted into acetaldehyde, which becomes acetate. And this acetate goes back into the citric acid cycle. Okay, that's pretty much it for alcohol. You just have to remember the enzyme alcohol dehydrogenase here. You also have to remember that NAD+ powers this reaction and makes NADH. Same for this here. NAD+ powers this reaction to make NADH. Alright. And this will come back into play a little bit later. I will also briefly mention that acetyl coenzyme A can also form something called ketones, or ketone bodies. This is particularly prevalent in starvation or diabetic ketoacidosis. Okay, so one more important thing to note is, so we had a look at alcohol metabolism and the NAD+ and NADH that is formed. Okay, we can contrast this to the anaerobic link reaction. I forgot to put that in earlier, but here we have NADH powering this reaction, forming NAD+. Okay, so this suggests that if we consume a lot of alcohol here, okay, we're forming a lot of NADH. Okay, we're forming a lot of that. Now we have a lot of NADH in the body, and what happens is it goes back to this anaerobic link reaction and powers this reaction because there's more NADH. Okay, so as a result, you're converting more pyruvate to lactate. And remember, if we have a lot of excess lactate, this is called lactic acidosis, and this is quite common in alcoholics. And we can remember that this is treated with sodium bicarbonate. Okay, so that was a really brief overview of all of metabolism. Okay, this did not go into a lot of detail about every reaction, which is what we'll be doing in our PSP on Monday. Okay. Also, I did not note every enzyme or every intermediate such as NAD+ or NADH being created. That's something for you to go back and fill in, okay? Because otherwise this would take 20 years to do. So good luck and hope this helped you out. Thank you for tuning in.